I get a ton of questions about training frequency, so I'm going to address that today. These are going to be 7 unique ways to incorporate frequency into your training right now. If you're stuck, if your training's gotten stale, this is one of the most predictable ways of getting progress to start moving forward again. So I want to talk about some of the pitfalls that people run into when they're not paying attention. And I want to talk about some of the use cases because some of this stuff works very well for the compound movements, but there are also a whole bunch of exercises that can be tricky to progress that frequency methods work very well for. We're talking about things like grip, we're talking about body weight movements, we're talking about accessories, things that might be a little tricky to incorporate into your training if the only thing you know how to do is to go a little bit harder or to add a little bit more weight. Now, increases in frequency are associated with a few different things. The benefits include increased neurological activity, so your coordination and your efficiency goes up. Remember that lifting weights is a skill, so the more touches you get throughout the week, the more refined that skill is going to be, and that correlates to short-term strength and performance increases, which is nothing but good. It also adds up to more total weekly volume, and it means that the volume you do get is going to be a little bit more quality because you're fresh. It's not all crammed into one session, it's spread out. So because you're more focused, you're putting out more effort, every touch you give is going to pack more of a wallop. Without further ado, these are 7 ways to incorporate frequency into your training right now so you can start seeing progress again. So the first item we have up is aptly titled the frequency method. There's a lot of different ways to apply this, and you've probably seen this in different capacities, but the one I'm going to show you is an example from Johnny Payne of Grayskull LP fame, who actually recommended doing this for bodyweight movements in conjunction with your main barbell stuff. The thresholds that are being recommended allow you to get an extra work and adapt without interfering with your barbell stuff, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. This is really great for things that are tricky to progress the way you would normally progress a barbell. So it's harder to get the load just right. Maybe there's fluctuations in the load. So with body weight stuff, grip stuff also, where you're usually having to do a hold with a specific weight, or if you're using grippers, there's big gaps from one gripper to the next. So instead, it makes sense to focus on the amount of work that you're doing as opposed to trying to change the load workout to workout. And if you can do that, and if you can adapt to more work day to day, you're going to notice very fast improvement in strength, your ability to knock out reps, and this is one of the most straightforward ways to do it. So you're going to start by finding your max reps at a certain load. So you're not going to change load workout to workout. Your body weight, the gripper you're using is the gripper. And assuming you can do, let's say in this example, you can do 12 pull-ups, you cut that number in half. Now, this is what makes this sustainable because you're going to be doing your sets throughout the day, not all at once. So by distributing that workload out throughout the day, you're going to be fresh. So neurologically, you're going to be able to hit with more of a punch. Every dose of stress is going to have a bigger punch associated with it. And you're going to start out at that 50% mark doing 5 sets throughout the day. So 5 sets of 6 spread several hours apart. If you're doing push-ups or if you have a pull-up bar at work or at home, super easy to knock these out. Every time you walk under the bar, you just hit a quick set of 6. And because it's definitionally light, 50% of your maximum capacity, it doesn't take it out of you. It's easy to hit on the fly. You probably don't even need to warm up for it. And as you go day to day, you just add a set. Now, you work up to a crescendo. This same pattern exists with the waves we do for loading, where you add weight up to a reasonable cap and then reset a little heavier and build back up. That same pattern is present here. The people that push back against using volume and workload as a way to drive growth, which it's a fantastic, proven, very predictable way to drive growth. They'll say, well, why don't you just do 1 billion sets? There is always a practical limit on what you can do based on recovery, how many hours are in the day. Once you hit a practical cap, you always pull it back and build back up. So it's not about just staying high volume. It's about adapting to more volume. Once you hit a limit, your goal is to adapt to more volume with a higher intensity, with more effort, with more reps. And that's why we reset, tack a rep on, repeat the cycle. So imagine if you are starting out at 5 or 6 pull-ups, it's not going to be very long before you're doing this with 8 or 9 pull-ups, repeated sets throughout the day. That's going to mean a lot of strength, a lot of size in your upper back. And again, it can apply to grippers. If you're not having an easy time coming up with easy ways to get your grip stronger, the frequency method is one of the best ways to do it. Very neurological in nature. So this is great for developing strength and power. That will in turn increase muscularity as you can apply that strength to different exercise and different modalities. So this is a great way for getting sticky movements to increase if you're not quite sure how to progress load. The second method for increasing frequency is using light sessions. Now, the idea of a light session is that it's a little bit of extra volume, just token volume, bit of extra work throughout the week that is going to create a stress. It's also going to have potentially some recovery components to it, and it's not going to screw with your main workouts. So assuming your main workouts are the heavy ones where you put out effort, where it takes a long time to recover, you can start to dose in these lighter sessions, and you'll be surprised at what you can fit in without it having any negative effect on your heavy day. And as time goes on, you'll actually be able to handle more and more while still being recovered. So the extra volume is the goal. Now you can do it with a technique focus, a recovery focus, or a capacity focus, and these all bleed together a certain way. The main thing is you're not trying to do any damage. So one of the biggest things I'm going to recommend is to prioritize things that don't have an eccentric, a lowering phase. This was very common in Westside GPP work. Things like jumps, sled drags, things like carries didn't have an eccentric, so they wouldn't get you sore. Eccentrics are known to cause a ton of muscle tear down, and you're not trying to do a lot of that when you're in the middle of recovering from your last heavy session. Technique work, speed work is good for that, to just go through the motions over and over. It's not going to hit with the same developmental punch as doing more traditional strength or hypertrophy work will, but that's not the point here. The neurological effect you get from doing the same movement repeatedly throughout the week, absolutely massive, huge for developing strength. Reduced effort work too. It could be just as easy as going in, repeating your last workout with a bit less volume and a bit less weight, RPE very low, and just going through the motions. For recovery, I do recommend blood flow work. This is great for the joints. Thing about tendons and connective tissue, they don't get nearly as much blood flow as even bones do, certainly not as much as muscle tissue does, so they take forever to recover. I swear a broken bone will heal faster and stronger than like a really bad tendon sprain will. And the thing that people that have to worry about that, arm wrestlers are a great example. The thing that they know is that those tissues don't get blood unless they're being used. So the more your tendons hurt, the more you want to get blood in there to help recover it. Some of my favorite things are doing very, very high rep isolation work with bands. Very easy on the joints, gets a bunch of blood in there. Cables work, certain machines, dumbbells might work. But lighter movements, high reps, not going for absolute failure, more focusing on the blood flow. Also, you can do very high reps, recommended to be substantially short of failure, but again, enough to drive blood in, get your heart rate up a little bit for the compound movements. That also has a good recovery effect, get your capacity up a little bit. Capacity focused work, now we're looking at GPP. We're looking at increasing your ability to hang, to do work on repeat without gassing out, and that's going to help your really heavy sessions, especially when you're in the shit right before a peak, when your volume and your intensity is at this like all-time high and you're trying to hold on by a thread. This will greatly help your ability to perform in those workouts, and it'll make you more useful. So there's a plus there. Again, carries and drags really good. Body weight stuff is really good. There are a whole bunch of modalities that will help capacity that will also carry over to this stuff. I also like throwing in isolation work to help weak points. I had a hard time doing reverse hypers after I deadlifted or squatted, because if I got a pump in my glutes, the strain on my glutes, it was like severe nerve pain. And I found that if I did them on a different day, it was just pure recovery. I get a little pump in my back, wouldn't affect my day, and I'd be recovered for the next workout. And that extra volume was huge for getting my erectors thickened out when my deadlift was at its all-time highest. And guys, I'm super proud to have Boostcamp as a primary sponsor of this channel. Not only is Boostcamp the easiest and most intuitive way to track your training and your progress, not only is it absolutely free to use, not only does it feature an immense library of some of your favorite programs, but it features an exclusive library of programs you will not find anywhere else. In fact, there's so much content there. I'm actually doing a series specifically dedicated to the programs that you will only find on Boostcamp. Stop what you're doing right now, click the link below, download Boostcamp. And guys, as I film this channel just hit 100,000 subs like 5 minutes ago, and that number would not have been possible without the support of sponsors like Boostcamp. Number 3 on the list, we're looking at DUP, daily undulating periodization. There's that annoying exercise science speak. Undulation just means to move back and forth, to undulate up and down, to roll back between different variables. So the idea is that periodization, linear periodization, undulates over a long period of time. So if you have a block that's 4 or 5 weeks of hypertrophy, followed by a block that's 4 or 5 weeks of strength, followed by the last block that goes into a power phase. That's how a lot of athletic programs operate. So you can build the tools you need, the force production you need to perform, and then right as you're going into the sport, power is the most specific. So that's what you're focusing on. DUP just does it all together. So instead of breaking this off into their own separate phases. You're trying to build them all at the same time. And the idea is that it is more efficient, that you don't have to detrain so much as you go from one phase to the next. But this is one of the easiest ways to make high frequency work because you're training in different thresholds. The problem of doing the same heavy workout every week or multiple times a week is that eventually you become stagnant. You don't recover enough. Really heavy workouts require a lot of time to recover. So if you want to populate the week with more work, you can't just do the same thing at the same effort. Something's got to change. So recovery can come from doing a different mode of training, like a different exercise. There's a little bit of recovery just by having a different neurological stimulus from having to move in a different pattern. And in this example, just by doing a different threshold in your workout, doing 8s and 10s instead of 3s and 5s, that allows you to get good quality work in without just hitting the same structures over and over and over the exact same way, because that will burn you out. So this is a very productive way of doing it. Now, this example, like I said, this is an athletic example. You're always going to see hypertrophy, strength, power written out. Keep in mind when you're doing keep in mind when you're doing singles, doubles, and triples as a power lifter, that's different than singles, doubles, and triples as a power athlete, like a football player, an Olympic lifter, because these are always fast, snappy. Power is speed, so time matters. You're not going to be grinding under these. So some people get confused about the difference between strength and power. If you're a power lifter, ironically, you actually don't need power. Now, you also don't need to do it specifically adhering to these thresholds either. The idea is that there is variability. Undulation is not specific to working a specific threshold. You can undulate a bunch of different things. You can undulate the volume, you can undulate the intensity, the effort, the type of movements you're doing. I mean, if you just did different exercises on different days, if you went from like a tempo deficit one day to a really overloaded like partial the next day to something like more of a standard lift the other day, that would be still in the same spirit of what undulation is, although it's probably easier for now just to stick with undulating the rep ranges. But what you would do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you work through your different rep ranges. In this example, let's say 3x5 on one day, 4x10 the next, 5x2 on the last day. And all you have to do is move those forward linearly. It doesn't have to be any more complex than that. Smolov is a really good example of this. Again, I don't recommend you guys do Smolov. I'm actually going to cover a lot of reasons why you probably shouldn't run this and why it's over your head. That's trying to do surgery with a sledgehammer.
Would you take a sledgehammer to my
It's a bit overkill. So what I recommend is, in the spirit of Smolov, which has worked for a lot of people, even though it's devastating, it was written by a Russian master of sport. It does the same thing. You have 4 different days. They go for, I think, from like 2s to 5s. There's like a day of 9s, and they all just progress linearly. Every day just gets a little bump. Now, the thing to keep in mind is you're not going to be able to linearly increase all of these thresholds for very long. Once a week would be hard. You'd hit a wall eventually, but trying to increase all of these thresholds, the rate at which you have trouble recovering from each workout to each week is going to it's going to accelerate, and you're going to be up against a brick wall pretty quick. So plan on week 4, maybe week 5, have that deadline set in where you're going to make these liberal jumps, and then you're going to evaluate. You're either going to reset or you're going to deload, or you're going to intensify by dropping these reps down so you can continue to add weight. But even then, you got to be very careful that you're not spreading yourself thin. But DUP is a great way to get a multitude of different qualities built into your workout without the complexity of a really long-term structure. It's easy to progress forward, checks a lot of boxes. So if you're looking to give a little extra love to one of your lifts, I recommend giving a look to daily undulating periodization. Now, number 4, we have heavy, light, medium. I put this as kind of a subset of DUP because, like I said, DUP isn't just changing the rep ranges. There's other things you could undulate, and as long as it's daily, it kind of qualifies. So heavy, light, medium is an example of that. Instead of working specifically through different rep ranges, you're working at different intensities, different amounts of effort. So it's often the same rep range. 5s is very common. It kind of exists in that practical programming universe. Andy Baker, who co-wrote one of the editions of Practical Programming with Rip, is a big proponent of heavy, light, medium. He's done some videos on it. I think this is how he coaches a lot of his athletes. And the cool thing is that it's an easy way to get a lot of work, which tends to benefit a lot of athletes and a lot of lifters early on, just by virtue of practicing the same movement over and over. That correlates very highly with easy strength increases. but it's also easy to recover from. So you can apply it to a lot of people, and it's also easy to progress. So it checks a lot of boxes as far as being kind of idiot proof while getting some of the features you want of high frequency training. So a good example would be having like a volume day on Monday. It'd be like a 5x5. On Wednesdays, a reduced day. So you're doing 1 or 2 fewer sets at the same rep count with a little bit less weight, 10 to 20% less. And then Friday, you're going for a top set of 5. This is similar to what the Texas method is. Now, the cool thing, and I strongly recommend looking at Andy Baker's work if you want more information on this, because he has a bunch of unique ways to kind of massage it and adjust it. For instance, you don't have to do it in this exact template. Your heavy day could just be a heavier volume day. It could be a day of ramping 5s where you're still getting a lot of sets in. You can do this with different rep ranges. You can have more of a DUP feel where you are playing with the rep ranges a little bit. The basic theme is kind of volume-ish on one day, intensity, a lot of effort at that rep range on another day, and then a recovery day somewhere in between. And it's just super easy to recover from. He also will write this in a whole body split very often, where something like starting strength gives a lot more emphasis to squatting. Squatting will be hit 3 days a week. Pressing and benching will like alternate, so usually only twice a week, and deadlifts I think once a week. So Andy will have you do squat, bench, deadlift, or some variation throughout the week, and he has a lot of cool ways of adjusting that. So I really like this for its simplicity. It's a rare example of a program that's simple to run, but also has a lot of options. So you can adjust it a lot of different ways. Again, progressing linearly, very easily, just adding 5 pounds, understanding that brick wall's coming for you as soon as you start grinding on the volume days, as soon as you start grinding on those intensity days. Just know that your days are numbered. Be ready. Hit that deload, hit that reset, or move the reps down so you can keep grinding out those gains. Number 5 on this list is alternating lifts. Now, let's say that you're doing a lift 1 day per week. Let's say you have 1 squat day, and that's kind of your primary lower body day. If you try to add in more squat work throughout the week, you have to pull out some wizardry. You have to have lighter days. You have to account for recovery. You have to figure out how you're going to be able to do that extra day without it impacting your primary heavy day. Now, let's say instead you decide to use a different variation of the movement, or a movement that works similar muscles but with a slightly different movement pattern. So a great example would be having a squat day, but now increasing frequency on the lower body by having a deadlift day. So you're going to be able to handle a lot more frequency, which is good. You're going to have an easier time getting into those hard workouts, and you're not going to have to be so meticulous with the way that you manage those workouts. You can actually keep that rolling forward by adding even more frequency by alternating back and forth. So there's some really successful splits that might have you go squat, deadlift, squat within the week, and you can still add a bit of accessory. You can still train to be a little bit more well-rounded. You're not going to be able to handle the volume as if you were doing 1 or 2 days per week. There's going to be a cap. Volume's going to have to drop per workout as frequency goes up. But every workout you do, you're going to be pretty fresh, as opposed to if you were doing just say 3 days of the same exercise. And what that means is that every dose of stress in that day is going to pack a bigger punch. So the big selling point of frequency is that every touch you get on these main lifts, you are fresher. You're putting out more force. Your sense of the weight is better. And that's a really huge benefit, especially when strength is a main priority for you. So going to something like an alternating split, that's an easy way to allow you to get some more work throughout the week without spreading yourself thin by hitting the same button over and over. A great example of this are the linear progression type programs, starting strength, Texas method, Grayskull LP, where they go off like an A-B split. So you're going upper lower body each day. You might go squat, deadlift, squat in the same week. Upper body might alternate between benching and pressing. Really good way to get a lot of hard focused effort on each of those lifts while still providing ample recovery. It's not so much focused on grinding you into the ground as it is focused on getting a good quality stimulus and then allowing you to recover, just a time to go in and get after it again a couple days later. Number 6 on this list is an old school whole body program. If you've ever picked up basically anything from Iron Mind, or if you read a lot of the programs that were popular in the 50s and 60s, even into the 70s, a lot of the biggest and strongest guys around, many of them were bodybuilders. A lot of them crossed over into strength sports. A lot of them trained on a whole body type of split. This means sticking almost exclusively to compounds, a little bit of isolation for smaller muscle groups for, say, the arms, but it was really focused on the compound movements, doing those as frequently as possible throughout the week. And that meant stacking everything into a whole body split. Now, the rep ranges in these types of programs very often wave between 5s is kind of like the staple strength range, and 8s and 10s for what was then considered more of a hypertrophy range. At the very least, the change in stimulus by having different rep ranges is beneficial. And over a long enough period of time, you can change those back and forth. You can swap exercise back and forth. There's a lot of options for how you roll this forward. This is an example from John McCallum's Keys to Progress. It's a great book. It's on the Iron Mind website. I strongly recommend you guys take a look at it. A lot of good, kind of like old school foundational wisdom. A lot of it's still repeated today. Very simple approach. And I think it's just as valid. If you look carefully, there's some things that are a bit outdated, but the application of these types of workouts are still going to yield the same results, even though some of the things we know have evolved a bit. But this is an example. This is a big one. This is a power and strength type program that John McCallum gave that's multiple times per week, going from back extensions, 3 sets of 10, to squats, pullovers, front squats, bench press, rowing cleans, behind the neck, and curls. That's a lot of training, and especially it's anywhere from 3 all the way up to 5 working sets. Some of these are 5 by 10. That's a lot of work. And he says specifically it's hard. You're going to be sweating. You're going to be winded. That's the point. This is a good way to add mass while building capacity, leaning out, hitting a lot of birds with one stone. I don't want to hear anything about whether or not it's optimal. Optimal is the enemy of good. And for most of you, good is the best you can hope for. If you set a baseline of work like this, you acclimate to it over time, and you do it long enough to show marked progress, especially if you're eating. That's the other thing. He recommends eating a shit ton because this is how you gain weight. You're not going to do this amount of work on a daily basis and gain strength or size if you're constantly in a caloric deficit. At one point, you'll weigh more than a golden retriever, and wouldn't that be great? So if you're doing all those things, you are going to progress, period, simple. And it's ran a few days per week. A simple progression on everything. You add weight where you can, a little bit at a time. And if you run it for several weeks, up to a month or more, you're going to notice as you adapt to the amount of work, you're going to notice that you're better off, you're stronger. And then there are other more focused programs. There's examples of programs that don't have this much work, that are easier to run through, that maybe feature less sets, that maybe have more reasonable arrangements of sets and reps. There are a lot of options. But the bottom line is if you want to get frequency and you want to hit a variety of different thresholds, from really heavy power developing work to the longer drawn out hypertrophy focused sets, this is one of the better ways to do it. I know a lot of you are going to be put off by the structure. This is going to seem, it almost looks juvenile, right? It almost looks like somebody in 3rd grade wrote their idea of what a program should be like. Like, this isn't fancy enough. It's not elaborate enough. Certainly there's got to be more bells and whistles. I've ran programs like these in the past, and I'm telling you, if you adhere to them, they work. It's really getting the most out of your time available because everything is focused on these anchors: behind the neck, rows, front squats, bench. Like, it's all just big heavy hitters. It's a fantastic way to put on some size and strength. And that brings us to number 7. And this is actually the one that I recommend the least. If you followed me at all, you know that I'm not a huge fan of this for most people, but it's viable, so it has to end up on the list. That is powerlifting or Olympic lifting specific work. These are programs that are designed specifically for dedicated serious powerlifters. That's your lifelong goal. You want to optimize your total at the expense of everything else, so you're going to be the most specific athlete you can be. And an example of that is going to be something that almost entirely focuses on the main lift. Not just that, but in strength specific ranges. So you're not going to be seeing 5 by 10 on any of this. You're not likely to see that anyways. So Olympic lifting, because it's so skill based and speed based, you see clean snatches, jerks done repeatedly on a daily, sometimes multiple times a day basis. And powerlifting, it's a very popular way to arrange it, is in a way that's inspired by that history of Olympic lifting and the way it's programmed. So Shaco is a good example of that. It's Olympic weightlifting wisdom applied directly to powerlifting. So the frequency is the same, the repeated efforts. You'll go from like squat to bench press back to squat. You'll have a lot of variations. You'll still have some accessory on top of that. But like, this is an example of like a 5-day high frequency split. Now, the thing is, these are very complex programs. You don't want to invent this from scratch yourself. You want to glue yourself to one that's already kind of established as being good for a general population and run through it. If you are a committed powerlifter and you run through something like a Shaco program, you're going to have noticeable results. But just be aware that it is a bit drier, so you really do have to get excited at the idea of adding 100 pounds on your total, 70 pounds on your total. and it's complex. There's pitfalls and there's a learning curve. So I recommend you don't do this unless this is going to be your plan moving forward, because the more times you run through it, the better time you're going to have with it. But again, it's very, very specific. If you just want general size and strength, you can get very, very, very strong without having to run something that is so complex or that is so dry and repetitive, because the way you make this frequency work is by having very careful selection of the percentages in the effort. Nothing is maximal here. Everything is sub-max. It's like homework, just over and over and over. Practice, 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 but the extra amount of work and frequency makes you an absolute killer. The people I know that have stuck with this stuff have gotten very formidable. They've seen rapid gains in strength. So it is viable. You just have to be very, very certain about what your goals are and what you're willing to do in your training, not just now, not just next week, but 6 months, a year from now. So be very careful when selecting this. And also, if you're new, if you've only clocked a few years of good training, if you're not that developed yet, don't even look at this. This isn't for you. If you're still in the process of getting a basically good physique, a basic amount of competitive strength, there's so many other ways that are going to slingshot you there faster that this becomes a long way around. Save this for when you are developed and you are just super serious about those specific goals. You built the base and now you want to just get it razor sharp. Then it becomes more appropriate for those higher level competitive lifters. So that's all I got for today, guys. Let me know what you think. What frequency methods have you had success with? Have you used any of these before? If you have, what happened? Did it work out for you? Leave it in the comments. Better yet, take it to Patreon. That's where I upload my training weekly, and that's also where I answer questions. We answer questions about members' programs. We do form checks. I give life advice. It's the easiest way to get in contact with me, so check that out. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.